What if I told you that 15 years ago, everything that transpired in the first 5 months of 2020 occurred online? There was an event in the MMO, that stands for Massive Multiplayer Online Game, World of Warcraft, called the Blood Plague Incident. It was not done on purpose, but around the world, people stood up and took notice of how this event transpired, and they used it to create models to see what would happen and how would people behave during a pandemic. And strangely enough, it all came true. Now, whether that was by design or not, we don't know, but there are already articles being written about this. What a World of Warcraft virtual outbreak taught us about how humans behave in epidemics. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are like, okay, that sounds awful cheesy. Wait until you hear the details. Just give me a minute to explain this. I've got to go through some game mechanics to show you how this occurred and why it was so much like what we saw. Now, the big difference between the Blood Plague incident and the most recent one is that the Blood Plague incident wiped out cities in-game, and there was virtually no way to stop it. Once players figured out how to do it, it was initially done by accident, but then players figured out they could literally kill everyone in their home cities in the game by doing this. It only took a few people. Blizzard, the makers of World of Warcraft, had to completely change everything, go in and change this. They had even tried to set up quarantine camps because they didn't want to interfere with the natural progression of the game. This is one of the things that Blizzard does. Sometimes things occur they don't foresee, and instead of just resetting everything, they just try to work around it. But this was something they could not work around. Now, how did this work? There was a final boss, a character that's much more powerful than normal enemies, for those of you who aren't aware of how an MMO works. And this boss, called Hakar the Soul Flare, whatever, had the ability to give you this quote-unquote blood plague. And what it did is it caused you to lose health over a certain period of time, but anyone who came within a certain area of you also got it. And then they were able to then pass it along. Well, normally, this just killed people within the area that they were attacking the boss. But something happened that the makers didn't foresee. And here is the little box that describes this. Corrupted blood deals 263 to 330 damage every 2 seconds, spreads to nearby allies. This is what happened in all of the major cities. Now, some are asking, how did it get to the major cities if this was only meant to be around this particular area where this boss was? They didn't take into account hunters. Hunters are a character that have pets, and they can dismiss their pets. They don't have to have them literally running by their side at all times. They basically go into their quote-unquote backpack or into their inventory, however you want to look at it. Now, if a hunter went into this raid and attacked this character and the pet got the blood plague, and then they dismissed the pet. You see, the pet can run way far ahead of you. You can have your pet attack an enemy while you stay at a distance from it and shoot it with bows and arrows or whatever. So the pet could get near, but you wouldn't. So you wouldn't have the blood plague, but your pet would. Well, you could then dismiss your pet and then go through and kill the boss. But if you then respawned after you got done with the raid and then traveled to a major city and then summoned your pet still had the blood plague. And then you just run through the city, and the way it works is your pet would spread it to everyone, who would then spread it to everyone else. And there were all sorts of hunters in the game at this time. It's not a more popular choice now, but it used to be. Now, it's a fairly simple thing to find a healer and have them dispel this blood plague. But what the makers of the game realized was that even with a few people doing this, there weren't enough healers to keep up with enough people, with the amount of people getting sick. And no matter what they did, it only took one or two, and they could wipe out the entire city in just a matter of minutes. That's how fast it would spread. Now, a lot of people have talked about it to that extent, but there was an aspect of this that no one talked about. Every city has guards. It keeps players from the opposite faction from coming in and killing everyone without the plague being present. They're just there to make sure that there's a safe place that everyone can go. Guards have some very specific characteristics. Now, you can create a player powerful enough to kill a guard, but you get no reward for it, and it takes forever. And the guards respawn virtually automatically. Some, like this one, stand here and don't move unless an enemy approaches, and then they go attack. Some randomly walk through the city. Now, what does this have to do with what I'm talking about? Guards have an incredibly high level of health, meaning that if you were to, say, give one of these guards the blood plague, it would take them forever to die from it. And guards also have the ability to regenerate health very quickly. They were made this way to discourage people from attacking them, to maintain this safe place. These were the original, you ready for this? Asymptomatic spreaders. Because you could give the blood plague to this guard and he virtually wouldn't die forever. Now, it wouldn't be too hard to avoid the ones standing out by the front of the city, but they were randomly walking through. You give it to one random guard that's roving through the city, and he himself could live through it almost indefinitely while infecting nearly the entire city just by himself. And that's what these trolls were doing. Now, here's another part of the connection that no one is getting. World of Warcraft has a currency, gold, silver, bronze, and it has a real world value, 6,842 gold pieces to $1 US. There are prisoners in China who sit all day long and they farm gold from the game and then sell it at auction houses for real US currency. And they have thousands and thousands and thousands of prisoners doing this 14, 16, 18 hours a day. Basically sitting there, slave labor, creating wealth. Now tie the two things together. Tie the two events together. And you see very clearly that somebody said, that's an interesting thing to look at, that blood plague incident. I wonder what would happen, because you wouldn't want to exterminate everybody in an opposing city. You would just want to weaken them to the extent that they were no threat. And this goes to a little bit more of in-game mechanics. In World of Warcraft, when you die, you respawn, and you respawn full health, as strong as you ever were. What if you could, within the game, just keep everybody at the lowest possible level of health and strength, to the point where they could not affect you as an enemy? That would be a much more desirable goal. And it makes me wonder a little bit about this whole thing with COVID-19. Because even just the fear of it now, even just the fear of it has weakened our society. Here's the wiki for it. You can read it. Just type in corrupted blood incident. And also, strangely enough, as if all that weren't weird, there's a character in World of Warcraft, and she goes back to the very beginnings of this, decades ago. Her name is Sylvanas Windrunner, and just prior to all of this happening, there was a cutscene that World of Warcraft created where she goes to basically Antarctica and defeats this guy, this enemy, and she removes his corona, his crown, and breaks it and releases it on the world. I kid you not. If you Google the World of Warcraft Sylvanas throne, crown breaking, that type of thing on YouTube, you'll find this cutscene. They create these every few months. And it's corona is basically the Latin Spanish root for crown. And that's exactly what she does. She defeats this guy and then takes his crown and then shatters it, and it creates the Shadowlands, basically. It's their new version of the game. But many have talked about this, and many have covered this, but they have missed some very important aspects of how this went down. The guards were the biggest spreaders. All you had to do was go to this raid, as a hunter, get your pet infected, dismiss your pet, leave the raid, go to a major city, find one roving guard, infect them. That's all you had to do. And it was over. They finally had to patch it. But this was all 2005. And the way it's played out, they even tried, like I had said, they had tried to create quarantine camps outside the cities where anyone who got it could just go and get it dispelled. But they realized they couldn't dispel it fast enough. So many got it so fast, just with one or two attempting to do this, that they had to just completely change it. And now here we are 15 years later. And here's this thing that's going around that is incredibly contagious, and we're seeing how the world reacts to it. There's no way to, quote unquote, I guess, redo the world servers, so to speak, in the real world. But there's another video I want to do about the people who control these MMOs, these massive multiplayer online games. And it's not the creators. The creators aren't the ones who are really in control. It's the players. And there's one specific group of players that have no other option than to live in the online world. And they have become a force that's now started to bleed out into the real world. But I'll do that in another video. So, anyway, like, share, subscribe. Happy Sunday, and we will see you next time. Thank you.